What's up, everybody? Thank you for joining me today. I would like to formally introduce you to Izzy, who just decided to leave. She was just hanging out with me. All right, well, today we're going to be talking about the small form factor, specifically the NCASE M2. And so as a Mac and PC user, when Apple first announced the M4 Mac Mini, I was just honestly could not believe how small of a form factor computer that they were able to build with so much performance. And so it really got me interested in kind of the small form factor PC side of things, because I really enjoy building computers. Up until now, I had been rocking a Corsair 5000D case, and then I decided, as I was kind of looking into the small form factor, to kind of ease my way into it, because I know there were some challenges that people are faced with in terms of component compatibility, etc., with especially really small form factor cases, such as a very popular one being the Fractal Terra. And so I decided, hey, maybe I'll ease myself into this with the micro ATX form factor. And so that's where we come in with the Lian Li A3, just starting that in January, and I got, I was able to get my hands on the 9800X3D, because I am privileged enough to live near a micro center, and they got this whole batch in. Been using it for a little bit, and then I was able to actually snag 5080 recently, and I was thinking, hey, as I was reading more about the small form factor, I discovered the NCASE M2, especially the cheese grater version. And especially as somebody who's been a MacBook Pro user for well over a decade now, that aluminum unibody finish, I always found it super, super nice and really loved it. And based off what people had been saying about NCASE, I was like, okay, this is definitely a case that I'm gonna have to get. I did look at their Form T1, but as this was my first time kind of foray into the small form factor, I decided, let's go with the NCASE M2, and I also really liked, as I was reading about it, the versatility of the NCASE M2. And so today we're going to be going into kind of my build process and what that was like. And overall, it was, fun. There were definitely frustrating components. Some of it was also due to the liquid cooler that we'll get into. So although you can use micro ATX motherboards with the NCASE M2, I decided I wanted more versatility in case I wanted to change things out down the road. So I decided to go with ASRock B850i. So first we have the CPU installation, and decided to get a AM5 contact plate, simply because I know it doesn't make necessarily a difference with thermals, but I figured, when applying thermal paste, I have read that it makes life a little easier, and I did discover that later on, that just using a little bit of a thermal paste spreader, I didn't have to worry about it going onto the motherboard at all, because the contact plate very much protected that. I put in the Ryzen 7 9800X3D, and then followed that up by putting in the contact plate. We then had our RAM installation, and I went with the classic DDR5 low profile choice with the Corsair Vengeance 6000. For the storage, I had two NVMEs, specifically the WD SN850X and the Samsung Evo, both of which were 2 terabytes. And so with normal mini ITX, you have usually one on the front and then one on the back. And so I will say that putting in the Samsung 2 terabyte NVMe into the back M.2 slot was definitely a little trickier, but having a magnetic screwdriver bit to kind of hold on to the screw as I put it in definitely helped quite a bit. After putting in those computer components, now it was time to jump in and build the NCASE M2. And so one of the things I did first that I actually found helpful was actually putting in the screws with the standoffs on the motherboard prior to actually putting the motherboard onto the panel. And so then I could exactly line them up with the holes and also test fit and kind of just place the GPU lightly into where it should be, so to kind of give me an idea of how much clearance I was going to put at the top to make sure that it wasn't straight up pressed up against the top panel. And then we decided to go with the SF850 mini ITX power supply. 850's plenty for both the 9800X 3D and the 5080. We then kind of played around with a few positions. Again, this is where really having those small form factor really works well. If you can definitely do this with a micro ATX motherboard and a ATX power supply, but it does keep you a little confined to where exactly you want to put things. I then applied the thermal paste. I went with the Artic MX6, which was surprisingly more difficult to spread out than I thought. It was a bit more thick. I ended up getting more on the card that I was using to spread, so I had to do a couple rounds to make sure I was getting an adequate layer on top of the CPU. And then we got to the most challenging bit of the evening, and it had nothing to do with the NCASE M2. So the Artic Liquid Freezer 3 has really good reviews. Both the 360 radiator as well as the 280 radiator have gotten great reviews. You can look at Gamer Nexus's review. They do a really good job of kind of looking at the thermals, the sound, and it's very, very in-depth. However, the one thing that they did mention is that the installation can be tricky, and boy was it tricky. Just getting in the brackets, the two screws into the standoffs, was quite challenging. And one of the things I ultimately found to be useful was the two standoffs by the CPU. I slightly loosened it up to give it just a little bit of give on one side, then went in. It made it a lot easier to screw it in, and then I re-tightened up the standoff, and then it really kind of locked into position. I know reading onto forums, there's people who have had different kind of suggestions for it. Kind of try these various different suggestions. This is just one that worked for me, and kind of see what works for you, because yeah, my wife and I, she really helped me with holding the radiator as well. Tried to get this into position for far too long. So just wanted to kind of give this suggestion to folks using it. The Build 7 on their website, on NCASE website, does use the 280 Artic Freezer 3. So that's why I went with it, because I know ATX build, mini ITX builds have lots of compatibility issues with dimensions, but I figured this would work. But the installation was just a little tricky, but it does cool very well. After installing the radiator bracket to the side panels, then I decided to install the GPU. Because the radiator I was going on the side, because the GPU was going to be on the top, I decided to now, before it gets blocked off, install the GPU. And then after installing the GPU, we had to put in the radiator into the side. And one of the things to kind of keep in mind is to really guide the wires, especially for the Artic Freezer 3, just because the radiator is a bit above average in thickness relative to other 280 radiators that you might find. Finally, one of the things we did was now put in the bottom panel. And then finally, we put the two side panels in, and then the top panel kind of secures the side panels into the seams. So one of the things that they mention is, other tech reviewers and PC builders on YouTube mention, is that the NCASE M2 doesn't really have the best manual. And I agree, in terms of other cases that don't even require a full build, have a little bit more in depth of how exactly to where everything goes. But it's not bad at all. It was still very, very manageable. One thing to really point out is if we look at the side panel installation here, if we zoom in, this is completely flat. But if you actually look at the radiator bracket that I put the radiator on, it has a divot, and one side is convex and the other side is concave. And so I thought I could use the manual to figure out which side would be facing inside and which would be facing outside. However, that was completely unclear until I actually put in the radiator, put in the side panels, and realized that it was slightly bulging and that I needed to flip it around. So something to just keep in mind. And then another thing that's nice about it is that they have a specific screw that can be used in pretty much every step. So if we look here, that is screw 5. However, they do mention that screw 6 has slightly stronger lock. So in cases where they do have the blue screw show up, like for instance here, I did use that screw over the screw 5, and then only in cases where they have screw 5 alone, like with the side panel installation. End of this video, I would like to thank everybody for watching, and thank you so much for everybody who subscribed. It means so much to me that so many people actually are interested in watching me, play video games, and I'll be doing a little bit of PC building content, as well as a little bit of 3D modeling and how we can incorporate that with our tech. And so if that stuff interests you, especially watching some gameplay, a little bit of PC building, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and like if you enjoyed this content. Feel free to thumbs down if you don't, that's okay too. And thank you again to everybody who enjoys this content and has subscribed and watched. Thank you, and until next time, peace.